Welcome to the Read, Talk, Grow podcast, where we explore women's health topics through books. In the same way that books can transport us to a different time, place, or culture, Read, Talk, Grow demonstrates how books can also give a new appreciation for health experiences and provide a platform from which women's health can be discussed. At Read, Talk, Grow, we use books to learn about health conditions in the hopes that we can all lead happier, healthier lives. I'm your host, Dr. Denise Millstine. I'm an assistant professor of medicine at Mayo Clinic in Arizona, where I practice women's health, internal medicine, and integrative medicine. I am always reading and I love discussing books with my patients, my professional colleagues, and now with you. I am so excited about my guest today. Helena Andrews-Dyer is an award-winning culture reporter for the Washington Post, covering the intersection of popular culture, race, politics, and art. She's written 3 books, Bitch is the New Black, Reclaiming Her Time, and The Mamas, What I Learned About Kids, Class, and Race from Moms Not Like Me. She lives in DC with a husband whose laugh can be heard for miles and 2 carefree little brown girls. Helena, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
My second guest is Dr. Angela Mackey, who's a pediatrician in the Division of Community Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine at Mayo Clinic Children's Center in Rochester, Minnesota. Dr. Mackey is the medical editor of the Mayo Clinic Guide to Raising a Healthy Child and co-medical editor of the parenting channel on the Mayo Clinic Press website. She also hosts the Facebook live show, #AskTheMayoMom. In her daily work, Dr. Mackey enjoys seeing her patients smile and helping families who are struggling with health challenges. She lives in Minnesota with her husband and 2 sons. Dr. Mackey, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me so much.
Today, the topic is going to be motherhood with a focus on navigating the world of mom friends, as well as that intersection with race, class, and other important topics. Our main book is The Mamas, What I Learned About Kids, Class, and Race from Moms Not Like Me. In addition, we have the Mayo Clinic Guide to Raising a Healthy Child, focused on children from ages 3 to 11. Helena, I feel like everybody wants to share their early childhood mother stories with you after reading your book, which I found fabulous. And it really resonated with me because I live in Scottsdale, Arizona, and am from the East Coast. So, total culture shift. I moved here pregnant with twins and I got involved in prenatal yoga. I connected with these beautiful, amazing women who were so different from me in so many ways. And I really learned a lot from them in terms of being a new mom and all the questions you have, from what stroller to is it okay that my baby won't roll over? So when you were drawing the picture of sort of cyber stalking these mom groups and then trying to find the way in that felt comfortable with you, it just felt very familiar. But tell us a bit about that time in your life.
Definitely. I think when you are a new mom, especially in this era, I believe, of parenthood, where so many of us who live in urban locales live very far away from their family, right? My mother lives in the Virgin Islands, and all my aunts, I have 4 amazing aunts who I would love to drop a baby off with. They all live in Los Angeles, where I'm from originally, and we live in Washington, D.C., and my husband is from Kansas. So, we're nowhere near, not an arm's length of any of the people that I think could help navigate me through this process. And so I knew going into motherhood that I wanted to find a tribe. And what's funny, a lot of people point out this line in the book where I say, like, your friends with kids aren't necessarily your mom friends, right? Because we had friends who had children and they were great, but I needed to have someone who literally, like, I had my baby on Monday at 5 p.m. and you had your baby on Tuesday at 6 a.m. Like, we need to be in the exact same lane. And I was able to find that through this large Facebook group based in our neighborhood. And it was just this whole different world, right, that I knew nothing about. And as soon as I was telling people that I was pregnant, one of my coworkers was like, "Oh, well, you have to join the Facebook group." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And then she invites me to this group and I'm just like, oh, here's all the stuff that I've been obsessing about. Here's a spreadsheet about daycares. Here's what it costs for a nanny share, because I have no idea. Here's the stroller everyone. And by everyone, I mean everyone of this, slice of DC socioeconomic pocket. And it just, for me, it was this explosion of information. And it also felt like I was almost like graduating to a new identity and trying to figure out where I fit in all that. And so race and class and, culture, all of that came crashing down in a way I never really had to think hard about before. But it was so clearly in my face when I joined this group that I really wanted to join because I knew I needed the support. But at the same time, you're wondering, well, what do we have in common beyond the fact that we're all trying to struggle through this same thing together? And sometimes that's enough. That is enough, at least for the initial sort of pairing. And then from there, I think you start to pare down, okay, is this mom like I'm a mom? Because you don't even know what kind of mom you are. You have no idea. You just met this little baby. So that whole process, I think, was so complicated in even just an emotional way that I didn't know it would be. I thought it would be so easy, and it was much harder than I thought.
Angela, you talk about in your book the importance of having support around you. I know you're a pediatrician, but for a good portion of early childhood life, the mom is very much your patient as well. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I feel like in those first couple of years, the mom, the dad, both dads, both moms, whatever their family looks like, they're just as much a part of my patient. And it's not necessarily what I was trained in. I was trained in pediatric pathophysiology, right, to be able to help and treat the families, but you really are treating the whole family. And I can't believe what a different pediatrician I was before and after I have kids. And I'm not saying all pediatricians need to have kids, but some of the advice that I was giving before I had kids, I look back and I what I was actually telling these families to do, because this is what I was reading in books and this is what the evidence shows. But then you become a parent and you realize, oh my gosh, that is not realistic. That is the farthest thing that's going to help the family in this situation, because I've been through it myself and I know that this is just unrealistic advice. And so I think I changed a lot and became much more of a pragmatic sort of pediatrician, meeting families where they're at and trying to really help them in a way that's going to help the whole family, not just the child, not just dad, not just mom, but then trying to come to some common ground. So we're still practicing safe practices for our babies, and we're still trying to use evidence-based practices in preventive medicine, but coming at it from a whole different angle, I think, is really, really important.
Having these people that you can lean on is so important. But Helena, you talk a lot about at first when you're on this Facebook group, you're thinking, oh, these people are not like me. They might live in the same zip code or on the same block and be in the same parenting phase as me. But you have a line in your intro that said, this is the story of what it's like being the only one in a Polly Pocket world of post-racial parenting that primarily concerns itself with baby music class and not class divides. So while you're navigating these relationships, you're coming face to face with some very serious issues as well.
Absolutely. And I think that is the thing that they don't tell you about, right, in all your prenatal appointments, is that you will sort of like need this support group, but at the same time, what you all value and what your background is, that you bring all of that into your parenting. And that could be aligned with people who don't look anything like you, right? Or completely misaligned. And I think, especially in new motherhood, it's just like, oh, we're all moms, we're all in this together. And my book, obviously, in any sort of parent or family structure, as Angela mentioned, but my book is about moms because primarily that's who was on maternity leave together, right? That's who was going to the baby yoga class at 6 weeks because we were like, well, we got to do something with these kids. That's who's going to the music class. That's who's meeting up in the park. And I think when I looked around and I felt like the only one, and yet, we've got so many other things in common. I'm highly educated, probably too educated. I am a professional person. I've got this quote unquote traditional family structure, all of those things. And yet for me as a Black woman, as a Black mother, there's something that I know that is so intrinsic to my parenting, which is that I'm raising two Black children. So there are some races at the forefront of my mind all the time. I always walk around in this body. My children always walk around in their body, in their skin. And that's something that wasn't at the forefront of these women's minds for a long time, right? And I recognized it on my first, I call it tour of duty, my first maternity leave with my older daughter. And I recognized it, I saw it, and then I just kind of filed it away. I was like, listen, it's this 5 months, because I was privileged to have a 5-month long maternity leave, and, we can just like be friends and this be great. And I not really have to worry about it. That's why I call it this kind of like, I was like moonlighting as a woman who didn't have to worry about those things. But when the world did not necessarily change, but when a microscope, right, especially in America, because of the pandemic, after George Floyd's murder, this stuff, and by stuff, I mean racial politics, became so much more at the forefront of what everyone was talking about, even though it was something that I was always thinking about. And then it became clearer I don't want to say who your friends were, but who you could trust, right? And who was truly parenting in the same way that I was, and who was valuing the same things that I was valuing. And that was eye-opening. That was truly, truly eye-opening for me.
Well, and I think it was so authentic and honest how you wrote about those conversations. And for a lot of them, you sort of hung back and just let these other women sort through a topic that they hadn't maybe so clearly or transparently thought about or spoken to each other about. Meanwhile, you're thinking, I'm in the room and this has been my life. You have a pretty stinging jab that says, who knew that racism could be solved with a spreadsheet? Probably not directly quoting you, right? But that group's approach to like, let's collect all of these resources. And instead of, like you said, kind of talking and looking at, how am I contributing to systemic racism or unintentional bias? Angela, I'm sure that you navigate these really challenging conversations with your patients not infrequently.
Absolutely, but I come from a place of privilege as a white woman, never having lived the experience of what it's like to be a Black woman raising Black children in America. It's definitely something that, like you said, post-racial George Floyd really brought to light in ways that people weren't thinking about or having conversations beforehand. Before this even happened, there was this wonderful policy statement that was way past due for the American Academy of Pediatrics, and it looked at the effects of racism on children, and not only just on their emotional experiences, their lived experiences in life, but also on their physical health and their outcomes throughout life. And that came out in 2016, and it was fantastic. Or maybe it came out in 2018, I don't remember the exact year, but it was, I think, groundbreaking for a lot of people who worked in pediatrics who hadn't stopped to think about how their privilege has given them different advantages, not only in other aspects in life, but in their health. I think it opened conversations with starting to talk about with our patients about the effects of racism on their health in the office, which I think is important for us to recognize for our patients to them, that we understand that this may be happening to them, and having an open space for them to talk about it, and also having spaces in our practice to start talking about this for our patients to them, that we understand that this may be happening to them, having an open space for them to talk about it, and also having spaces in our practice to start talking about this as a people and thinking about how systemic racism has really detrimental health effects on people across the spectrum, not just in pediatrics.
Helena, in your book, you talk a bit about a lot of the data that's out there about racism in areas such as school choice, how schools are clustered, and you would like to think that they're clustered by people who have the best intentions for their children and want the best schooling for their children. But in fact, there is a sectioning off of schools by race. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, what I think was so fascinating, especially about what Angela said, it's just this idea that I think what changed for me, and what changed, I think, for a lot of parents, not just parents of color, is this idea that race and thinking about race is not something separate from your parenting, right? I think and I talk about the mom groups and parenting groups in the book a lot, and so many were imploded under the weight of folks wanting to talk about George Floyd, folks wanting to talk about the so-called racial reckoning and how it was impacting them and their children, and other people being like, oh, well, we're not here for that. We're just here for diaper rash cream advice. And It is like, no, these are one and the same. They're always one and the same for me. And they should be for you, because while I am very clear on the fact that I'm raising Black children, I think too often white parents are not clear on the fact that they are raising white children, right? They are raising children that could be contributing, will be contributing to the system that we all agree should be dismantled, right? Because it is affecting our physical health, it's affecting our emotional health. And so I think in that chapter that you're talking about, when we're talking about school choice, in DC, we have universal preschool. So I'm talking about 3-year-olds, right? And because I'm a nut, I'm a type A mom, I'm going on the school tours and I'm going to the Ed Fest and I'm talking to principals, just like all my other friends, and creating Excel spreadsheets about which school had this. And, oh, this one had a French class after school for 3-year-olds, right? We're talking about all of that, but I'm also talking about something different with some of my Black mom friends, because we're asking about disciplinary action and how are you disciplining kids of color? How many teachers of color do you have in this school? How many male teachers of color, right, do you have in this school? That's really important to me. And it should also be important to other parents. It should not just be important to me, because what we model, not just what we say to our children, but what we model for them, that is what changes their world. That is what changes their perspective, because you're showing them, not just saying, oh, we don't see color, which is ridiculous, or, in this house, we value X, Y, and Z. Well, you don't have any other type of friends. You are literally plopping your children down in these very homogenous situations, and then wondering when they say something racist, a 5-year-old to my child, and people get shocked. And they're like, oh, I don't know where she gets it from. Well, she gets it from you. She gets it from what you're showing her. It's so funny. Just the other day, my daughter, Sally, she asked me if we could be Jewish. And I said, well, we could be, but I was like, we're not. Why are you asking me that? And it's because she wants to celebrate Hanukkah. And so this whole, right, because she wants 8 crazy nights of gifts as opposed to our just one day. And so we had this conversation about what that means, right? I think there's so many parents where that would just freak them out. If your child came and said, oh, I want to celebrate Kwanzaa, and you'd be like, and just run away from the conversation thinking they don't understand it. But she gets these concepts. She's 5 and she understands these concepts. She understands racial difference. That's what I talk about in that chapter too. We think kids don't understand race, which is a construct, but they do. They get it. They see what's going on around them. I have a great quote in the book from a researcher, and she says, we know kids don't understand calculus, but that doesn't mean we don't teach them math. That doesn't mean we don't teach them 1 + 1. And I think when we're talking about race and we're talking about class in the society, we have to start that. We have to not be so uncomfortable with having those conversations with our kids.
I'm so glad that you brought that research into your book when I read that, because it's something that I try and talk about with my families. And I had seen before I had children, and my husband and I have been trying to have these conscious conversations from very early childhood, right? From 1 year on and going forward, and talking about the beauty of differences and loving and looking at in valuing people for their differences and their color and where they come from, but also understanding what their experiences are. So I think when you put that in your book, one, I'm not sure who your audience is for the book, but for all of the white women that are reading this book, I just kept thinking, yes, this is so good that you're including this research in this, and all of the social researchers and all the other people that you included in the book, because I don't know, for me, when you really do research into it, I feel like, yes, people are finally going to listen. But I guess the pandemic has also taught me that people don't listen to research as well. So it is somewhat of a struggle.
Yeah, I think all of that is really so important. Well, let's talk about assumptions that people make. So you live in DC, you've already said that. You were at this park one day and there's a boy that's behaving badly. So you are, upper middle class, well-dressed family who happens to be Black. And here's this boy who has nothing to do with your family, but you're engaging with him to try to redirect him. And this, you call him the band dad, comes up to you with some really truly insulting advice for how you can manage this other child better, assuming he's related to you.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that incident was so devastating in a way, but devastating for 2 reasons. Because one, I wanted to explore it in the book because I don't think we explore class enough in America because we don't think we have class structures in America, right? We think just everyone is like sort of middle class, right? I think that that is like our view of ourselves, right? And not truly looking in the mirror. And in this particular situation, and I have a whole chapter in the book about gentrification. That's a separate chapter, but I explain that in the book because I wanted these third places to have more of an impact when you read about them, because this playground in particular, one, it's completely new and it sits on the graveyard of an old elementary school that was shut down and then torn down when there was all this white flight from the neighborhood and nobody goes to that elementary school. They tore it down and we built this beautiful park, and across the street is public housing. Right next to that is like an $8 million flipped row house or something, so that's like all of this stuff, like literally we're shoulder to shoulder right up against one another. And we're at this playground and this boy's behaving badly, this little black boy who we did not know. He was there without his parents and he was harassing this little girl about her bike in a way that was beyond just like kids playing, right? He was like really bothering her. So as her and her father are leaving, because my husband was trying to mitigate the situation for about 15 minutes. Finally, her and her dad leave. And before they walk out, he sort of like conspiratorially like puts his arm around my husband's shoulder and is like, hey, there are all these programs in the city. If you give me your information, I could send them to you and he could get a free bike. And it took us a minute and we're looking at this man. We're like, wait, do you think this is our child? And I responded completely, because I have very little filter. I was like, this isn't our effing kid, right? And of course, my husband is so much more gracious, I shall say. And he was like, no, this isn't our child. We were just trying to help you. And the dad, I think, then he finally like sees us, sees my husband and I, sees that we just came from brunch. My mother, who was living with us at the time, she just came from church, like, looks at us and this looks at this little boy and realizes, oh, these two people are not alike. These two groups are not alike, even though they are all Black. And he is obviously horrified and he just like runs away. And he leaves my husband and I there alone to sit with this interaction. And I'm upset because I'm like, well, you didn't see us. You didn't see my bank account and my Ivy League degrees, rawr. I get like mad about that. But then I think to myself, like, what do I care? Why should I care that this white man that I don't know and have no connection to sees me for quote unquote my success or achievements? Like that shouldn't have a bearing on my life. And then I also think to myself, and why am I trying to separate myself from this little boy who, all told, after the situation, is de-escalated, is very sweet, And so it was this very awkward, icky situation for me as a Black woman to think of my own class divides, the intra-racial class divides. And then this little boy, my mother like becomes friends with him. She took him to church once. It was like all this thing. But deeper into that chapter, I also tell a story that's just Black folks at that same playground, right? Me and some of my bougie Black friends, and then some other folks who were from across the street, which we called the condos, and them going through something. And one of their sons was acting up, and a friend of mine, and we're all Black, walks him out of the playground. And then this woman, his mother, comes back to me and she says, well, what did he do? And I was like, oh, well, who's just acting up a little bit. I think he needs a break. And she was like, well, this is a public, and what she was telling me was exactly right. She's like, this is a public space. She's like, and I would expect that of them and not of us. And that statement hit me to my core, because I'm like, well, who is the them and who is the us? Who has power in any given situation? Who's the gatekeeper in any situation? And that can be fluid. And it cannot have to do with race. It could have to do with class. And I move through those spheres somewhat fluidly in my life. I'm not like prescriptive in any way, but I think just pointing that situation out and shining a light on it, because we assume that our roles are set always, right? And they aren't. And someone could see me as the person who's excluding, even though I can see the next person as excluding me. And so all of us should be having these conversations within ourselves. I think the thing about good memoir, and I'll stop talking in a minute, is that, it's not about me pointing the finger, right? We talk about the chapter, the effing girls. It's not me always saying, well, white folks do this and white folks do that, because I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, I'm doing this same thing to someone else. And I think that I would hope Angela asked about the audience for the book, I wrote this book for moms like me because I want us to feel validated in all these crazy experiences that we have, but also moms completely unlike me, because I want them to have a peek into the types of things that are running through our heads all the time. I call it the invisible diaper bag, the play off of the invisible knapsack, because we're all coming into these situations with so much baggage and so many things. And once we recognize that, I think we will be able to communicate better and actually find community, right? If we're talking about the mom groups and trusting mom friends, which I think is so, so important as we're talking about health, right? My mental health, even all the anxiety that some of these groups have caused me, I think the net is positive when it comes to my mental health, because they have been a great support group. But I think a huge part of that is trusting each other. And I think a huge part of trusting each other is seeing our difference, recognizing it, celebrating it, and understanding it.
That's how I felt when I was reading the book, is it very much to me was a call to recognize how much more you gain by surrounding yourself with people who maybe don't live or look exactly like you, and how that makes us all better. And I really appreciated in your book that you were vulnerable in that way, to not say or portray that you always did it exactly right or took the higher road. I mean, you got in a fight with a kindergartner.
I did get into a fight with a kindergartner. I did. She's okay though. I actually see that little girl. She goes to the same school that my daughters go to school.
So a question for you, Angela, is about bullying, which I would say often comes from power differentials and often from people not understanding how they treat others who are in a different situation than they are. Can you talk about that from a pediatrician perspective?
Yeah. I think we're all pretty aware, but bullying is not the same as it was when we were growing up as girls. It's invasive. It comes into your home. It's coming into your bedroom through social media, and it's 360. It's not just, you don't have a safe place at home where kids could go home and have some respite from whatever their bully or perpetrator was doing to them in a school setting or an after school setting or maybe a neighborhood setting. It's all around them now. And so kids are really obviously growing up in a very different world than what we expected and what we did before. The way I address it is just at all of my well child visits, and actually just any kind of visit when kids are old enough to start talking, I start asking about feelings, emotions, how they're doing. And I also think it's really important to kind of normalize it's okay to not always feel good. By starting those conversations about how they're doing, how are you handling your big feelings, who are you talking to, what are your coping skills, it opens up those conversations where kids maybe would feel ability to disclose. There's so much education in schools now, really, really young, about bullying, but bullying doesn't really happen as much in elementary school as pathologically it does as in middle school. Middle school is like the worst time for all kids, and I just want to fast forward it for all of them because they are all just struggling. They are just really, really struggling. And the kids in elementary school are always really good about telling anybody when they're not bullying, because they're really into that dichotomy of good and bad, and bullying is bad and not bullying is good and stuff. But in middle school, it's just omnipresent. So starting to have the conversations, having open conversations with your kids about, I think, anything, right? And those conversations, like we talked about with race, start early, but those conversations about emotions and feelings and developing a positive coping toolkit for children start early. And I feel like I'm really killing this part as a parent, but I'm not either. Like my kids certainly struggle on their own days and stuff, but I think it's just, we just have to start building resiliency up in our children, because sometimes we can't protect them from what they are going to hear and what they are going to face, but making sure they understand the importance of who they are and how they are valuable, and why they are important and why they are loved, can really help build that resiliency up for children. And so they can bounce back from some of those 360 attacks that can happen on social media and other areas.
I'm really hoping that Helena decides to write a second book for
Mhm.
those middle school years.
That time just, it really terrifies me. So my oldest is 5 and my younger daughter is 3. And it's funny you talk about the elementary school years, but I am also hearing from my friends with older kids, like let's say like 9-10-year-olds,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, ooh, like the
Yep.
mean girlness is like
Mm-hmm.
starting. And I hate that.
4th grade.
I mean, I just can't believe it. And
Mm-hmm.
I hate the fact that me thinking about the girls, I'm like, oh, well, girls can be so mean. It's like, yeah, human beings can be
Mhm.
really mean.
Mhm.
But I think for me, what was my saving grace as a kid was that I was a dancer, and that like built up a lot of like self-confidence
Mhm.
about me and my like in my body. And so that's sort of where we're pushing. I'm like just like pushing the girls into that right now. But I think what's so different about my daughters, and I don't even know if it's just me modeling, I'm trying to, is that they are very aware and in touch with their feelings in a way that I don't believe I was as a child or even have. And I was raised by a hippie, pot smoking lesbian woman. And I don't even know if I was that honest. Like Sally will tell me, she's like, that hurt my feelings. I did not like it. I did not like it when you did that. You know, and I'm just like, where are you getting this from? And I think as much as it can frustrate me throughout the day, I am very, very heartened by the fact that it seems like, as you said, they're doing a really good job. I think in her school, especially, they talk about conscious discipline, they talk about emotions, they talk about their feelings from preschool. And I'm really seeing the fruits of that now. And I feel like it's just my job to continue it, you know, and blow it up and just talk to her about the fact that it's okay. I was just talking to a friend of mine. We were talking about how the girls will like be so mad at us now, and they're only 5. And her daughter said something like, well, I'm not happy with you because you did X, Y, and Z. And so all of us are just like having coffee talking about this, and the rest of the moms are waiting with bated breath. They're like, well, what did you say to her? And she was like, I said, I'm happy that you shared your feelings with me. And we were just all like, you know, it's so different from how we were raised. And it can feel as if it's like, oh, are we not disciplining them enough? Are we not, you know, doing this the right way? But I think all I want is for the girls to know that their feelings are valid and that they can come to me with them. And so, you know, when you're coming to me with them at 8:15 and it's time for us to get into the car and I don't want to hear about this, it can be frustrating. But I think we're trying to sit in that place where all feelings are good, and I want to hear about them all. That's the biggest thing, because when they do become preteens, I want them to feel like they can trust me to come to me with their feelings, good or bad.
It sounds like you're killing it. Your daughter can already do I statements. I don't like this being you make me feel and all of those things. Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. I love how you said, like, I want her to feel validated. The worst thing, right? When someone invalidates our feelings and makes us feel crazy or gaslights us for the feelings that we're having. It makes us think that they're all in our head or the situation's not real. That's fantastic. Your mic drop moment just happened, and you can just roll in the rest of the parenthood.
Right, I'm done. I'm done.
Well, I want to thank you both for having this great conversation with me. We mentioned a couple times about who the audience is for the mamas, and I think it's really for all parents to explore and to just read this really remarkable and beautiful memoir. I also want to re-mention Dr. Mackey's book, Raising a Healthy Child, which gets into a lot of the nitty-gritty advice about specifics with health-related issues as well. It's been just an honor to talk to both of you and explore parenthood and its messiness and its many facets. I just really want to thank you for being part of Read, Talk, Grow.
Thank you. This was amazing. And I'm absolutely getting Angela's book. I cannot wait.
I loved your book. I'm so glad that you invited me to be on this. I can't show it because of my stuff, but it was so good. I think I'm going to read it again. I didn't to incorporate everything. I think I just need to like go through it again, make sure it all soaks in, and I can apply it and start using some of the knowledge I feel like I've learned from it. So, and thank you, Denise, for having me as well.
Thank you for joining us to talk books and health today on Read, Talk, Grow. To continue the conversation and send comments, visit the show notes or email us at readtalkgrow@mayo.edu. Read, Talk, Grow is a production of Mayo Clinic Press. Our producer is Lisa Speckhard-Pask, and our recording engineer is Rick Andreessen. The podcast is for informational purposes only and is not designed to replace a physician's medical assessment and judgment. Information presented is not intended as medical advice. Please contact a healthcare professional for medical assistance with specific questions pertaining to your own health if needed. Keep reading, everyone.